this meeting. The meeting will be recorded and is being live streamed on YouTube. Councillors taking part this evening are present here in the committee room. If any councillors are joining the meeting remotely, and I don't think there are any this evening, they do so as an observer and will not be able to participate in the discussion for any application on the agenda, which we only have one. For those participating in the meeting remotely via Google Meet, the virtual meeting technology does have a chat function. However, please only use this to raise IT-related issues, which will be dealt with by hopefully Mario, who's with us. As chair of this subcommittee, I will not be monitoring the chat. In the event of an internet outage, we'll adjourn the meeting and then come back and start again. I'll first introduce the members of the planning committee as follows. So how are we going to do this? Councillor Jessica Webb, next to me, who's our vice chair. We've got Councillor Lee Scott. We have Councillor Sarah Young. We have Councillor John Narcross, Councillor Ali Sadek, and Councillor Michael Desmond. Councillor Claire Potter will be joining us shortly. She's just running a bit late. Next, I'll introduce the council officers present in the chamber. We've got Natalie Broughton, Head of Planning and Building Control. We have Christine Stevenson, our legal officer, and we have Gareth Sykes, the governance officer. Before we continue, I just want to briefly outline how the meeting will proceed. The purpose of a pre-application meeting is to make planning subcommittee members aware of planning committee proposals coming forward. An informal discussion will take place in the application on the agenda. We'll first hear the proposed scheme summarised by the planning officer. The applicant will then be invited to speak about the scheme, and members will then be free to ask questions of the applicant. So slightly different to our usual application meeting for those of you who are new to the committee. Those attending in person or observing this meeting online are reminded that the committee will not be making a decision on this scheme this evening. It's just for discussion. I won't be taking any contributions from the floor. This is a meeting in public. It's not a public meeting. Subcommittee members are not representing either their wards or their political parties at this meeting. And can I emphasise that subcommittee members should not take into account and discuss non-material planning matters. If a member has any interest relating to an application on the meeting agenda, they must consider whether that interest ought to be disclosed, and where appropriate, they must withdraw from the meeting while that application is discussed. So we'll now move to the published meeting agenda, beginning with apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I have apologies from Councillor Joseph and I believe Councillor Levy as well.
Okay, great, thank you. And just that apology for lateness from Councillor Potter as well. Any declarations of interest from any of the committee members? No. I don't believe we have any proposals, questions proposed to the subcommittee by the council's monitoring officer.
That's correct, Chair, we don't.
Thank you, Gareth. We don't have any minutes of the previous meeting.
Yeah, we don't have any. It's been a while since we've had a meeting, so no minutes to print.
Excellent. We can move straight on then, in that case, to Technico House. I believe we are being led off by, I did check this just 2 minutes ago, and now I've moved on.
I think it's Rob.
Rob, I knew that.
Yeah, can I just check that I can present images in the normal way? Yeah. I'll try it anyway. Can everybody see that? I can't hear anybody.
You can see it, Rob.
Excellent, thank you. I'll continue then. Yeah, the site is one in Shoreditch. It's a block bounded by Christopher Street, Wilson Street, Crown Place, and Earl Street, quite close to Finsbury Square, not very far at all away from Liverpool Street Station. The most significant heritage asset in the immediate vicinity is a terrace of Grade 2 listed Georgian houses on the north side of Christopher Street. Last year, in October last year, this office scheme, a 21-storey building with 3 basement levels, was approved, and it would provide about 65,000 square metres of office space, quite a large scheme. The current pre-application submission is for a slightly larger building, but with enhanced sustainability credentials, which is welcome, but of course there's some work to be done to ensure that those sustainability benefits are actually delivered. The main issues of concern at this point relate to heritage impact, form and massing, sunlight and daylight impacts, and cycle parking provision. But also it's worth noting that the scheme has the potential to be an exemplar in the sustainability terms. And really, I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to the developers to explain the scheme in more detail.
Thank you very much, Rob. We've got a group of people here. We've got Fiona and Bernard from Edge. We've got David from Mitsui, Tom and Francesca from AHMM, and Hugh and Jake from DP9. Who's leading us off?
I can chair.
Great.
I'm Hugh Salvey from DP9. We've got a presentation for you anywhere between 20 and 25 minutes. Feel free to join in and ask questions as we go along, or until the end of the way. We'll have an additional introduction from Edge and Mitsui, JV partners, and then Tom from there who will take you through the scheme. We'll cover the whole process. So we've got to today the main benefits of the scheme outline.
Right. And I think just on that basis, if we can keep up questions and comments at the end, that's probably easy to get through the meeting.
Last one to start.
So,
Can I just ask, sorry, I just don't know which are the architects, which are the,
yeah, do you want to set out who's who on this?
Yeah.
So, Fiona and Bernard from Edge.
what is Edge?
Yeah, can you explain?
Edge are the developers, so they'll introduce them and their background shortly. Tom from Edge, the architects, and David from Mitsui, JV with Edge. Okay, I should actually just say we've also got a model of the scheme. There's two elements to it. Obviously the white building is our proposal. The building to the side is the previous scheme, and they're interchangeable. So if you do want to walk around the model, interchange them as you see fit. Tom, I'll let you presentation.
Good. Well, thanks a lot for the. I think just silent. Does it work?
Can you turn yours off? There you go.
Good. Thanks you for the introduction. Thanks all for inviting us here in this beautiful room. Much appreciated. You already asked the question, who is Edge? I'll try and very quickly explain that before we get into the more interesting sort of matter of run through the scheme. So Edge is a developer originally from the Netherlands, privately owned developer with a long track record in delivering very sustainable buildings. So very much realized that sort of being sustainable has become suddenly quite fashionable over the past 2-3 years, which is a great thing. But actually it's something that we've been practicing for the past 25 years, starting off in the Netherlands, where we had sort of delivered buildings, and these things were cool, sort of a lot from the River Maas, then we brought Lead to the continent, brought some BREEAM to the continent. We built the Edge in Amsterdam, which for a long time held the credentials of being the most sustainable building in the world, based on BREEAM credentials, now being overtaken by a building in the city here, Bloomberg, but probably was slightly more embodied carbon, but that wasn't sort of incorporated in BREEAM yet. We've expanded into Germany about sort of 10 years ago, to get a number of very sustainable schemes there. We just completed the biggest timber hybrid building in Europe, I believe, in Germany for Vattenfall. So it's all built out of timber, very sustainable building, got the highest sort of sustainability score according to DGNB, so basically the German version of BREEAM there as well. So very proud of that one. We've done a lot of very sustainable buildings in the Netherlands, complete timbers with headquarters for one of the sustainable banks. Another one that we just completed a couple of months ago is our first sort of completely energy neutral building. Unfortunately, something we can't do here, because you can't do that sort of at the Bulker Master that we deliver here, but sort of 5-6 story building you can. So that's something we deliver. So a long track record about sustainability. I think we've 1 or 2 more slides here. And so basically, the whole business, and again, the privately owned business, set up with the idea that the 2 key challenges that we need to go after, so sustainability. And that's something that we realized a long time ago. So buildings contribute to about 40% of carbon emissions. So if you build better buildings, you can actually make an impact. So that's been a big focus of the business. But there's also a room like this. This is a great space. It's sort of uplifting, inspiring. Most office buildings, unfortunately, aren't like that. I think for a long time, we put people in buildings that sort of, well, don't really uplift your mood, are not good for your health, not good for your well-being, and we think that it's time now to sort of change that and deliver sort of slightly more inspiring building people to want to be, where people can thrive and be healthy. I think that's not just a nice thing to do. Again, we're pleased sort of others are picking that up as well. It also makes a lot of sense, sort of, well, A, to get people back in the office at all, but B, sort of if people are happier, we tend to be a bit more productive as well. So normally the CFO will quite nice this approach as well. So overall, that's the foundation of what we do. And the next slide, how we do that, this is of course very high over. We always have this focus, in our business. It's 4 pillars, so it's well-being and sustainability. And to be clear, sort of well-being also includes sort of social well-being. So we see as our responsibility to look after people in the building, but also to make sure that the building sort of knits into its wider community and becomes part of the community. That's why we really embrace the affordable workspace approach that we're taking. I think for us, that's something that we've been doing a long time. Our headquarters in Amsterdam, if you ever happen to be there, it's what we call Innovation Hub. I think it's sort of slightly better word to market it, but sort of it basically does the same thing. It brings together an ecosystem of smaller companies and creates that setting that's sort of, that we like at our building. So we very much embrace this affordable workspace, as you see in the designs, to bring it at the base of the building and create innovation up at the base. Sustainability, for us, 2 key things. One is energy consumption. So a lot of experience delivering very low sort of energy, or buildings with very low energy consumption. A lot of that is in smart technology that we use, sort of the lighting, a lot of work with Philips, making really sure that you get lighting there, some air source heat pumps, and all these sort of small measures that sort of bring down energy consumption. All electric, of course, we don't use fossil fuel. And then it's about embodied carbon. And there it's a big focus on sort of, first of all, reusing what's there. In a building like this, the buildings are unfortunately not worth a lot, or sort of they're not really sort of worth maintaining. There's a lot under the ground. There's a very deep basement, lots of foundations, and actually more concrete. So we've worked hard with our engineers to sort of make sure we retain that existing basement, because that saves of carbon down the line. That's the biggest asset for us. And design and technology for us are enablers. So design is very much about sort of taking an inside-out approach, people-focused approach to design, making sure that it delivers the right sort of experience, create space people actually want to be in. Technology is what you need to use if you want to live in very sustainable buildings. You need a lot of technology in a building. We use that technology, for instance, to provide air to the space where you need it, to sort of optimize sort of occupancy, to optimize how we run the plants over the course of the day. All these small measures to reduce energy. That's how the whole proposition comes together. We're partnering on this project with Mitsui. David has started as well. We've been working together for long. We're very pleased to be working together with Mitsui, giving us a very long-term focus. I think our alignment on ESG and sustainability. So David, if you could.
Extremely briefly, Mitsui is a Japanese developer, probably the oldest and biggest Japanese developer, and we go back several hundred years, and that really is indicative of our kind of approach to development anywhere now, which is really a very long-term view and the purpose of it. We've been particularly involved in London and New York in the last 20-25 years, outside Japan, and the aim is to invest more and more into those 2 cities, but particularly in sites like the former BBC television site at White City and BBC buildings there, which we've been involved reinventing with our partners Stanhope, and we'll continue to hold those for the long term. British Library Extension, we're also working up the road in Camden, where we again are developing a partnership with the British Library, the Alan Turing Institute, to develop facilities both for them and for the Knowledge Quarter there. And we completely espouse Bernard's philosophy of a sustainable design, sustainable construction, and the kind of office environments and working environments that actually belong to the community they're within. That's why we're very, very enthusiastic about obviously partnering with them, and particularly for the site here, which we'll discuss more about now.
Okay, so I'm Tom Winter, Associate Director at HMM Architects. Hopefully everyone can hear me at home as well. Great. So the clients have introduced themselves, and the brief that they've set us is quite clear, and as described on the slide here, to just set new standards for office space in London. It has been mentioned about the enhanced sustainability offer that we're looking at this scheme, but it's also about quite simply creating the best office building in Hackney, in London, with high quality office space, high quality appearance, and a very significant amenity offer, which comes to the core of how people work today. So we have a sustainability and well-being brief that was set about low embodied carbon in our proposals, low energy consumption, high quality outdoor space and biophilia, which is connections and access to nature, optimal daylight and fresh air, and then achieving various accreditation with BREEAM Outstanding, WELL Platinum, etc. Essentially an office-led scheme. There is an element of retail at the ground floor, but principally it's an office development. We, as a firm, have worked in Hackney for many years. We've been involved in the continual refurbishment of the T building for over the last kind of 20 years, I think. We've most recently finished a scheme in the top right, which is Shoreditch Village for Brockton. We are on site with the scheme at 225 City Road with Glamco. That's residential above office space. And we've then also received planning consent for Development House. Now, all office-led schemes, all with different approaches. We like to think contextual responses to their specific location in Hackney. We're also working with a very extensive and experienced design team. In particular, we have Atelier 10 as services engineers, AKT as structural engineers, both who are at the forefront of sustainability and driving down carbon within the schemes. And also notably MRG, the landscape architects, and you'll see some of the approach to outdoor spaces and planting that we're looking to deliver on the scheme as well. You'll be familiar with the site. It's obviously already been introduced. It's quite a transition site. So to the south, on the right-hand side of this image, are a number of taller buildings, and in particular, the whole Broadgate campus will soon be much, much larger than is shown there. But obviously, to the north is the lower scale context of South Shoreditch. To the east, so the bottom right of the image, is the setting of Finsbury Square, of which our building provides a backdrop. We're also aware of the developments that are emerging. So the blue and the yellow schemes on here are buildings that have received planning consent. So again, you can see the increase in height to the south and to the west in particular. As has already been mentioned, there is a consented scheme on the site. Just a couple of images, townscape views here, which show the character and massing that was consented, and we might touch upon that a bit later. And then the aerial overview again, which has been presented. And I think a starting point for us is, it wasn't about tearing this up and starting again. It was thinking, well, what were the key principles of this scheme that we would want to retain in a new development? So, the inclusion of office space, affordable office space is very, very important, and where that's located, having multiple entrances to the building, active frontages and retail at ground floors, considering how the massing steps as it rises through the site. So in particular, how it's lower in the foreground of this image in the northwest corner, rising to a taller element in the southeast corner. Considering key townscape views and context, the LVMF restrictions on the site, and also thinking about areas such as servicing and outdoor terraces. So I'm just going to take you through the 5 kind of touchstones that we've outlined for this project, and it will touch upon all the elements of the scheme to date. So the first key principle for us was to create what we call a public room, or a central street running right through the heart of the site. Now, this is a publicly accessible street, which members of the public could walk through during the day, something that we always feel is very important in our commercial schemes, about being open to the public, allowing public to enter and access and feel welcomed. We think, these office buildings today shouldn't feel closed off and intimidating to enter. So driving a route through the middle has been a fundamental principle to us. The sketch on the screen here reflects that. So connecting a street through the middle from Wilson Street to the west, so at the top of the image, and Crown Place to the east on the sort of left-hand side of the image. And that will allow people crossing all the way through. And the important thing here is not just about create any kind of shortcut, is to allow people to wander through and feel welcome and come in. And this street will be activated by some element of retail, planting, artwork, workspace as well. We've adopted that approach in a number of schemes. So on the left-hand side, we've got our One Broad Gate just to the south of this site, our refurbishment of the Arab Associates building there, where we've got these kind of temporary cafe spaces that are located there, exhibitions that get held and people can kind of walk in and out and walk through. Television centre on the right-hand side there that we completed with Mitsui, again connects two parts of the previous television studios there through an office development. So an image of our scheme. I'll come back to some of the characteristics a little bit later, but this image is reflecting that route through the middle, and you can see on the right-hand side workspace. In this instance, it'll be the affordable workspace. There'll be breakout spaces, meeting spaces, touchdown areas, with then a good clear, effectively 2-story height, 6 meters clear as you walk through, and visibility of the atrium spaces above, which I will also introduce shortly. So this ground floor plan shows that arrangement, the street through the centre there, and just to touch upon a few other elements of the scheme. To the north, we have the affordable workspace provision over 3 levels. So it'd be this ground floor, a mezzanine floor above, and then the lower ground floor beneath that. That's all interconnected with staircases and breakout areas. To the south of the street, we have the primary office core. To the left of that, the loading bay, which is smaller, much smaller than the consented scheme. The intention here is to provide, or we will be providing, consolidated servicing, which means all the deliveries are collected elsewhere, off-site, packaged up and brought together, so there's fewer deliveries to site each day, which helps reduce traffic. It also means you don't have as many vans coming in, you don't need as many loading bays. So it's a really, really good, sustainable approach. I think most office schemes will ultimately be delivering this in the future. And then retail on the southeast and southwestern corners. The southwestern corner connects to our cycle store entrance, which is located on Wilson Street, adjacent to the cycle highway running through there, with the intention being that our retail and our cycle store entrance could ultimately become one space. It could be a kind of bike cafe workshop area, quite lively, really promoting cycle usage. To the east, we set back the building on Crown Place, creating a colonnade that runs along the length of Crown Place, which provides an entrance and a clear front door to the scheme. There's a retail unit being provided there with covered outdoor seating space, balconies above the entrance, and then the affordable workspace. Those lower levels are very, very visible there. The second touchstone for us is about creating a building that's very much of its place, that responds to the character of Hackney. It is a large office building. We are looking to deliver a large amount of floor space here, but we're very, very keen that it isn't something that's alien to the borough and does reflect its context. So first move here is about setting a sensible datum or a shoulder height, as shown in the diagram on the left-hand side. So as with the consented scheme, 5-story shoulder that runs around the west and the north of the site, and before the massing then steps up above it. We've looked very carefully, and we continue to look very carefully at the character of the context and Shoreditch in general, of the immediate context and slightly distant context as well. You know, we really love the detailing and the grain and the colours and the brickwork and the tones that are visible in Hackney. We want to bring that through into our scheme, and you can see a lot here is a lot of brickwork with elements of stone and concrete interspersed within it as well. We've also looked very carefully at proportions and bay widths, and how some of the more warehouse facades combine these elements. So we've got sort of slightly tighter grain and tighter bays, and wider grain, wider bays, and we've looked to bring that through into our scheme. We've also looked very carefully at context colours, and there's a couple of our schemes referenced on the right, where we've looked at how we've taken different brick tones and brick bonds and mixed them together and created a kind of contemporary response that integrates different colours in different patterns. So to show you a couple of images of the scheme at these lower levels, the first one here showing the scheme as it appears on Christopher Street, 6 metre rhythm of piers, which loosely relate to plot, adjacent plot widths of this building plots opposite and nearby. The key point here is also to respond to daylight and solar heat gains, and we're very, very keen to maximise daylight to the office spaces. We've got large office floor plates. We want to maximise daylight for health and well-being here. So it's about creating that openness to the facade, but also respecting the character and the context. So we're looking to integrate brickwork, these vertical brick piers, in reference to the warehouse facades you might see nearby, with then elements of concrete and reconstituted stone running through as well. Importantly, also providing solid panels and upstands beneath the windows, so that clutter from desks and things like that isn't then visible on display. Second image here shows the approach from Liverpool Street. So this would be a key approach view from a lot of people using the building. And here we also make reference to corners as well, and how a lot of buildings in the context deal with intersections and corners within their buildings. And this chamfered approach here, we think, works very successfully. In response to that, it helps reduce the impact. It also helps signpost and identify entrances, and we think that's a nice detail to bring into the corners of the building. Then as we step up beyond the lower floors, we start to introduce setbacks. So that first setback is particularly important, something that we've been discussing with the officers about through our pre-application process. This drawing shows a typical floor above once the setbacks are introduced. So you can see we set the building back on Christopher Street to the north, on Wilson Street to the west, and also there's a large cut on the southeastern corner, as the consented scheme did, to respect daylighting to the residential scheme to the south. We have the core located on the south of the floor plate, which helps mitigate or minimise overlooking to the residential tower, with a smaller core to the north for circulation. Again, just to touch upon the process we've been going through with the officers, we have been actively engaging with them and listening to comments. This is just a selection of imagery. On the left shows the consented scheme as visible on Christopher Street. The middle image shows how we started to think about setting back our massing. And I think what's really, really important for us is that rather than, and the distinction here is, rather than having one setback, we introduce a number of tiers in the building. So you'll see in the notes that the setback the first setback we're creating is slightly less than the consented scheme, but then we set back again above that. And through further discussions with the officers, we've pushed that back even more, as shown on the right-hand side. And if this plays, which it won't very well, we've also been considering kinetic view. So as you move down the street, you can see on the left is the consented scheme. I think the tall tower element at the end, in particular, plays a large part in how you perceive the massing. And I think on the right, you can see the number of tiers that we've introduced, we think help reduce the impact on this street. So we've been using this technology to consider the massing from these key approach views. And then a couple of the static views that we have here, where, of course, when you stand on different streets and looking different ways, you're always going to get different views of the building and how you might compare it to the consented scheme as well. But in this particular instance here, we're just highlighting the sort of increased visibility of the sky on Christopher Street. And also on Wilson Street, where our massing starts to step back, there's, again, less of a sheer facade there. The more of the terracing starts to increase visibility of the sky and introduce more outdoor space. And then this element here on Wilson Street, showing the facade there with the entrance on the left-hand side, which provides access to the central street with balconies above it, and the atrium at the very top of that, which is where it meets the facade. So moving on to the third element of the scheme, the idea of greening the city and the terracing on the upper floors of the building, a very, very key part for us. And one of the main briefing points the client set us was making sure every floor had access to outdoor space. Every tenant has access to outdoor space. And that was a key driver for us, and ultimately set a very clear brief when comparing it to the scheme that got consent. How do we provide outdoor space to every floor, to every single tenant? And that drove our response. And on the left, you can see the diagram which shows how we look to break down the massing and interlock a series of terraces that step up from the northwest to the southeast to create these series of terraces that in turn allow greenery to be provided on those terraces. And on the right is an image of a scheme in Clerkenwell that we've delivered, where we start to use planting on the balustrades edges there to bring greenery, visible greenery to the building. This loose concept sketch shows how that then makes its way all the way up to the very top element of the building. The key design intent here was to mix both the orthogonal city grid at the lower floors with then the diagonal that ultimately is what restricts or creates the cuts at the top on the tower element, which is what you'll see in the consented scheme does that. But then we kind of follow that angle all the way down to create this geometry. And this view looking down on the terraces shows how that interlocks. It shows the very big outdoor spaces that are being provided on all of the floors to all of the terraces, and how there's an opportunity to introduce greenery as well. This simple upper floor plan kind of shows that as well, how those terraces are created as they step down the building. As I say, we've been working with MRG landscape architects, and we've had some a good discussion with the officers recently about this. I think it was very welcomed, that the approach that we're delivering here, and it's about creating a variety of spaces across all of the floors. So this idea of a gradient of outdoor spaces that responds to different microclimates. So providing planting and seating and furniture on some floors that might have higher wind requirements, or on other floors that might have more shaded requirements, and think carefully about defining and designing each terrace slightly individually. Also thinking about biodiversity and habitats, and encouraging wildlife into the cities and wildlife corridors through developments, and thinking how we might help with that. And then some indicative drawings of how we might be delivering landscaping on these terraces. So it's not entirely green space. We are providing hard surfaces as well for outdoor seating and meetings. We're considering views from all of the terraces to the local context, the microclimates, and on the right you can see the kind of variety of colours and characters. The key thing here being that whilst that will be experienced by the tenants, this will also be visible in the context. So the different planting strategies and colours will be seen from a distance as well. This fragment view of the upper floors of the building, and I think the key thing to note here is how we look to continue the language, the facade language below. We felt that was appropriate to keep the language going rather than immediately change to a different system here, to keep a simple, refined palette and allow the planting then to sing, and the geometry in the terraces to become very clear and visible. We've been developing a number of townscape views where you can see how the building kind of steps down. I haven't got kind of befores and afters with the consented, but we are considering how we feel this would benefit and be a more appropriate response. Then lastly, on the massing, it's about how we create and integrate the top of the building, where we rise up to the tower element, or the tallest element at the top of the site. And for us, it's about interlocking this with the terraces below, the massing below, not it feeling like a slightly separate element, which might be how we felt about the previous scheme. I think You can see here the size of the floor plate up there. It's also about creating usable space. You know, we don't want to create such a small, tall element that the floor space is not really, you can't work, won't be attracted to it. We want to create good usable space up here. And this view from Clifton Street looking south shows how the tallest element of the building then relates to the lower floors, and you can see the kind of 4 tiers of the massing here stepping up, the greenery as it wraps around, but also how the building speaks to its context. You can see the buff and brown colours of the brickwork in the foreground there, and we're looking at changing the gradients and the tones and the colours as the building steps up to lighten the top. We're also aware of some of the longer distance views from the west, in particular Finsbury Square. The context there is very, very different, and we feel our building is still going to be different to this. It has different language, it has different materiality, but we have been considerate, and we do think it's important to respond to this in some way. So looking carefully at the size of the windows here, it's a much finer grain, more vertical in proportion on Finsbury Square. We've been looking carefully at the massing, so the top of our building, as noted in here, appears slightly wider, but you can see as we've kind of gone through the design process with the case officers on the right, we're now very, very close to the outline of the consented scheme, but also creating an approach to massing that relates to the geometry of the spaces below. Just a couple of before and afters here. So the consented scheme has these, is a bit more volumetric. It has these cut elevations, highly glazed elevations, intended to read slightly differently to the foreground. What we're looking at doing is continuing the language up, that more verticality, smaller proportion of windows in reference partially to the foreground, but also what you can see here is the interlocking of the terraces and the greenery becomes very, very visible. You'll see these gardens stepping up beyond Finsbury Square. And then also looking from the south, this is our building here. You can start to see the proportions of our tallest element speak to the width of the Crown Place Tower from this angle. So last 2 topics, not many slides to go. Internally, it's about creating a real best-in-class building, the best office space we can possibly provide, and that includes the amenity offer within the space. We recognise that these floor plates are large, and some people do often have concerns about daylight levels within these spaces. So I think our first move on this one is through the lower 7 floors of the building, we've carefully considered how we can bring light and activity and amenity space to these floors. So we've integrating these 2 atria that step down from the outside. So once you get above sort of 7th or 8th floor, the floor plates get a bit smaller. They then get access to outdoor spaces. The requirement for an atrium is not the same on those floors. So the idea here is to allow this within these lower floors. We are still considering how it steps, whether there's 1 or 2 atria and the angle, the size, but this idea of creating that space that runs right through the heart of the building is very, very key for us. And then this image shows how that will also be visible from the street. So as I say, when the public walk through, they'll also get these amazing views up the building to the greenery, the light, the activity that's occurring on these upper floors. So then this drawing shows that typical floor where we have the 2 atria, the core on the south. The amenity space is created on a typical floor. So these are breakout for the office users to step out and meet and greet. And there's opportunities for the spaces to be interconnected with staircases. We're looking very, very carefully at what plants you can grow in these spaces as well. And then lastly, the office spaces themselves. So making sure we create good levels of daylight. We've got large floor to ceilings here. It's just over 4 meters floor to floor, 3.1 clear to the underside of the panels, 3.2, 3.3 above that. it exceeds any of the other office buildings that we're currently doing at the moment. And I think that's really important in terms of delivering the high quality spaces that our client is looking for. And that leads on to the final topic, which is about building for the future. And we talked a bit about sustainability at the beginning. You know, we're looking to respond to multiple requirements and guidance documents and policies and emerging government, you know, issues. We are hitting, you know, we are having to hit, and we are looking to achieve the highest possible accreditation with BREEAM and WELL and neighbours. I think what is different here is that the client is driving us really hard. They're pushing all of us in the design team to go far beyond that. And they've set their own targets around embodied carbon. There's some figures there, which we can do later if necessary, about driving down embodied carbon. We are all being asked to think very, very carefully about how we're doing this. There's energy targets that have been set within Edge's own net zero carbon framework, very, very low energy performance targets as well. So you have to think very, very carefully about how we heat the space, light the space, how that's controlled, and that's where the technology comes into that as well. And also thinking about water and drainage and reducing water usage through the scheme is a very, very key element there. I won't talk about this too much, but you know, we as designers think carefully about a holistic approach to environmental design in terms of how you develop the facades, the systems within the building, materials, the use of renewables, but also how the building is, you know, the connections the building has to its context, the end of trip facilities that are provided, the biodiversity, the natural light, use of openable windows, things like that is very, very central to us. That manifests itself in a very, very complicated diagram here, but the engineers have been working under sort of 6 key principles around energy, health, healthy environments, looking very carefully at the facade design, the use of materials, access to nature, and integration of nature, and then water usage. And we can come back to some of this later if there's any questions. And the last point about the approach to sustainability, which links to our lower levels, is about the basements and the lower floors. And one of the highest carbon intensive parts of any building is digging basements. Now, the consented scheme look to remove all the existing basements and dig 3 full floors of basement, which is the yellow outline you can see on the drawing here. And our first starting point was to not do that, to look very carefully at the existing basements and the retaining walls, so the red dashes there that are shown there, trying to work within those, see what we can deliver within the spaces there so that we don't unnecessarily dig and create demolition, impact carbon, huge carbon costs, construction impact of all of that. And so that has led to the cycle provision that you see referenced in here, and then the affordable workspace figures that we're providing. And in particular on the affordable workspace, we've been talking to a number of operators to get their guidance on that. One in particular is the Trampery, who operate within Hackney, very successful company. They're very, very excited by the scheme and have helped guide some of the design proposals here. And you can see that we're providing affordable workspace, say on 3 floors, the lower ground there, the first basement level, ground floor and the mezzanine floor. The consented scheme actually had less above ground and had a second basement floor of affordable workspace. That was one of our first moves to remove that and just have that 1 floor below ground that's well connected from above. And the Trampery really feel that this, you know, the location is amazing for them. It's really unique that on that fringe of Hackney and Broadgate to the south, and the city is great and will attract a real mix of tenants. And they actually feel there's a real value in offering large basement spaces as well, possibly as an event space, but also apparently large screening rooms would be very attractive in this location. They also think that these visual theatrical spaces that we're creating between ground and first floor and how it connects to the lower ground as well are hugely attractive. So these double height spaces here overlooking, and this is on Christopher Street. And so they've also given us a brief for how we divide up the spaces, how we can look to provide suitable space for a mix of users, so creating kind of members' lounges and arrival spaces on the frontage of the building, breakout spaces and meeting rooms within the spaces, and then how we can carve up one large space into multiple kind of co-working open plan or studio spaces. And I think the last point from them is about they're very interested in internal mentoring schemes, so the ability for commercial space users to mentor and engage with affordable workspace users. And I think that's why we've been very keen to bring the affordable workspace into the heart of the scheme. It has frontages on Christopher Street, but it now also has access to and frontages on the central street, which is the ability for commercial users on the upper floors to meet with the affordable workspace users, and also provide spaces for the different companies within there to meet themselves. And this then shows the two lower floors there as visible from Christopher Street. Very, very lively, large glazed elements, and you can see the life and character within there. So that's the design. One final slide on in consultation, and then it'd be good to get your thoughts. So we've been going through the pre-application process. We've had 5, I say, design-focused pre-application meetings with the team. We've met with the Affordable Workspace team twice, transport team twice, and the public realm officers once, and we're looking to meet them again so that we can coordinate through the submission process how we might get the public realm interfaces around our building. We've also engaged with stakeholders through June, July and August. We distributed flyers to a number of addresses, a large number of addresses in the area. We held a public consultation event, social media campaigns, on-street engagement as well, and have collated responses where we can. It's fair to say we didn't have many attendees or responses, unfortunately, but we've had some, and we've we've considered it all, and we've also actively engaged with One Crown Place to the south of our scheme. We met with Councillor Nicholson a few days ago, and the Hackney Society on Monday night. So that's it. That's our offer. That's where we are. To conclude, 3M outstanding, accessible ground floor, around 44,000 square metres net of workspace and retail. High quality, affordable workspace, large provision of cycle storage, which goes beyond what the consented scheme provided. We understand that the policy has since changed since the scheme was approved. Consolidated servicing, looking to integrate with public realm, and ultimately a commitment to delivering this scheme in Hackney. Our client is very, very keen to get on and build this building. This is a very real proposition, and something we're excited to bring to Hackney.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Really detailed presentation. So thanks very much for bringing that. I'm going to kick off the client committee. So I'm just going to lead off really on, I'm sure you know this is coming, the retained facades on Worship Street. So could you lead us through your thinking on those and the case of definition?
Yeah, I can bring some slides up if you want to start here, and then I'll get some slides.
Yeah, I've been discussing with officers throughout the process. I think the previous scheme did retain a facade ban. When we interrogated that, and I think Thompson will bring up some slides, it provided very compromised floor space because of the nature of modern buildings and the floor to ceiling heights versus obviously the Victorian facade. You'll see that the new floor plates almost met in the middle of the windows. Now there are solutions to that. You can either set the building a long way back, or you can have step downs, but it does lead to very compromised office floor space. We took some heritage advice as well separately. It's non-designated heritage asset, it's not listed. I think it's probably fair to say it's not the best example of its kind in the area. And our view was the public benefit of providing better floor space outweighed the loss of that heritage asset. Now that is something we still need to to agree with officers. And Tom, I don't know if you want to just take us through what the assessment we did.
So Hugh's kind of summarised it there. Am I coming through okay? Great. So there is obviously character to this building. We have looked at it carefully. We've not come to a quick conclusion here. I think it's worth noting that it has been modified extensively. It isn't an existing building, it is simply a retained facade. So behind it is some quite complicated steelwork keeping it up. The existing building connects into the back of it. You can see the ground floor there has been messed around with quite a lot, as has the parapets above it. We recognise that the consented scheme did retain that element. I think, on close investigation, we have, and this is a drawing that was submitted through the planning process as well. There are areas where there are floor slabs, particularly on the first and second floor, that ultimately they don't align, but more than that, they would clash and become visible through the facade. And it'd be very, very complicated there. I mean, you also then have a very large building sat right above it, only a few meters back. So we kind of felt that this was sort of not the best of either world, really. It was kind of not really supporting or improving the quality of that existing facade, and it was making the spaces within it also lower in quality. We did look at, could there be possibilities of taking it apart, rebuilding it, stretching it so that it matched the floor plates, and then also looking at the idea of removing it. I mean, we've had lots of engagement with Hackney on it. There are differing opinions. I think the design review panel have suggested that they think that demolition could be justified if suitable justification is provided and the proposed architectural solution is of the highest quality. I mean, we feel that we are providing a high quality building here. We are tying into the context heights, and this image there that I showed earlier is what would be replaced on the site there.
So I suppose I had a wander around today, and Crown Place, as you'll know, some of those great, got a couple of heritage assets around there. Very effectively, actually, not just the chapel and the pub, but actually facing on the side streets, you will know, I'm sure. I suppose I just find it slightly ironic that the presentation has led quite heavily on taking the sort of language of Shoreditch, which is a very special place for these buildings, and we do our best to try and maintain the heritage and history alongside the sort of significant developments going on there. And so it would feel like a real shame that we lost that building particularly next door, just on the basis of, we're keeping some of the language in the new building. I mean, to what extent do you think that there are sort of options to make it work in this that you might be able to look into?
Someone else?
I think it'd be wrong of us to say that it couldn't be retained. But it does need to compromise floor space and a loss of area. I think that's some of the advice that we've received from the agents, which obviously leads to the layouts these space and it will be challenging. It will be less attractive, and that's what led us to the decision. The other thing which I didn't pick up on was again carbon and sustainability. When we've been asked to amend the scheme anywhere around, normally the first question is, can we amend it? What's it look like in the townscape? It's confused. Interesting, but we take that feedback back to Edge is, what does that mean for structure? What does that mean for embodied carbon? What does that mean for steel? We've done an exercise for this, and because of the sheer amount of structure that's required to maintain the facade in its position, it's actually a worse carbon intensive approach. Again, it is a delicate balancing act, and we are still coming to that with officers. And we're looking for some guidance on that. So there is a solution. It can be retained. We can do things that are approach in this instance.
Yeah, I would just add that there is it isn't just about sustainability. That is one side of it as well, and then there is a real design intent behind this as well. We want to create the best possible office space. We feel that it gets slightly compromised by doing this, but we recognise that leads to the removal of this facade.
Yeah, I suppose best practice is easy when you're sort of starting from a blank piece of paper, right? But it's part of the whole considerations in the area. Can I take questions on this and any other heritage sort of aspects, particularly around the Georgian terraces? Hands up for anyone who wants to. So I saw Ali first, Michael second, and John third.
I went around the impact on floor space. I'm just looking at it as a big layman. It looked quite small relative to the overall development. And I think you mentioned 44,000 square meters. I'm just wondering what proportion of floor space overall is impacted by retaining that. Is it just the floor space in that bit of the building, or would it have a sort of significant knock-on impact on the floor space attached to it at the various levels?
Yeah, I suppose it comes down to how it could or would be integrated. So, in the instance here, if we follow the principles of the consented scheme, very, very low levels of daylight within those because of how the floor plates integrate and where the windows are positioned. I think you're right, it is a small part of the floor plate, and it is going to be principally the area behind that will be most affected. We're not saying it's going to significantly impact the entire floor plate. But this is a prominent corner, this is an important part of the scheme, and we do want to make sure every bit of space in the building is the best it can be.
Thank you. Councillor Desmond?
Looks a very attractive plan to me, and I think it's got a great deal going for it. 10 or more years ago, I vigorously opposed the demolition of the light pole, which Hamilton wanted to get rid of as part of their scheme. It was one of the 12 angry events sort of thing with Henry Fonda. Anyway, it was preserved, and then Hamilton came back 6 months later and said, right, we can preserve it. It's still there. I haven't been there for a while. I need a drink, actually. But so that was one building. Can I ask you what this building is currently used for? Because that would be of interest on perhaps going down a look. And the other thing is, although we haven't yet gone on to the affordable office space, I don't know too much about the Trambury, but I do know other similar schemes. What sort of businesses do they attract?
Existing building use?
Yeah. So the existing building use, as Tom already mentioned, the current building is actually no longer a building, it's a retained facade in front of the building that's behind it. The building behind is currently occupied by the London Stock Exchange. We use it as one of the data centres. So it's.
Did you say the London Stock Exchange?
London Stock Exchange. So that's how the building is used to date. We fully recognise that sort of, because in principle our sort of ethos is to retain as much as possible, as I explained. In this one in particular, it's the balancing act, and of course we hear what you're saying, and we have very carefully sort of considered the different sort of pros and cons of retaining it. But of course, in that balancing act, take your opinions and sort of your viewpoints from tonight into consideration. Talking about the trampoline and the base of the building, I think it's good to sort of mention that in relation to the street. One of the challenges that we normally face is that it's nice to sort of make a public building, but normally it's quite hard to then get the public in. People, even if they are welcome, they probably don't feel welcome. What we like about the trampoline and sort of the affordable workspace offer, and that's why you can see sort of it faces onto the street, there's this permeable layer, sort of breakout areas, is that they tend to bring in sort of a range of smaller companies, so smaller startups, slightly growing companies. By doing that, you create an ecosystem. And this idea of an ecosystem, again, really works. It's exactly what we have in Amsterdam. I think there's close to 200 businesses in our building. It's a lot smaller than this building. It ranged really small ones, slightly bigger ones, slightly bigger ones. And it's an idea of growth. So smaller companies can start at the temporary discounted rate. If they grow, we have loads of different sort of sizes of floor plates. Ideally, they could sort of move up into the building. It's these small companies that sort of have a lot of people sort of coming and going, so they create the life as well, and they make it sort of the whole base of the building there for sort of more public, draw people in, create life there. In return, the big occupiers, they want sort of get people into London. They like London because of the hustle and bustle of London. You can bring that into that ecosystem. It's a win-win situation for both. So that's how it works.
I think if I could just add to that as well, I think the way Trampery operate as well is that they don't tend to design a space that's just for one type of occupant, because affordable workspace by its nature is these smaller startup firms. They don't tend to go on a waiting list for years to join. They just need space and they need it quickly. So people like the Trampery look to provide that space and keep their spaces flexible so they can cater for very different companies. I mean, they have a lot of in Hackney, they have a lot of companies in kind of creative industries or small tech firms. I mean, in particular here, just north of Broadgate in the city, you can see where the kind of media tech offer will be quite important there, and it's a great opportunity for these smaller startups to locate themselves. But ultimately, it is a space for multiple people, and I think that's where having space across 3 different floors with slightly different characters also helps drive a variety of tenants. So there are some tenants that want below ground spaces for screening rooms or event spaces, and that can become a really attractive proposal to their business, versus others that would prefer different kind of open plan spaces.
But it is good to mention, I think, that in terms of the overall proposal, the previous proposal has 2/3 of the affordable workspace underground. I think we think by definition people shouldn't be working underground, so we have 2/3 of the space above ground. People like the Trampery, they want some stuff like a basement for event spaces, etc. It's mostly because clearly, sort of, if you're in the basement, you have even lower rent, so they quite like that space to sort of have these temporary things, events, screening rooms. But in our case, it's only sort of, it's less than 1/3 of the space rather than sort of the majority of the space. So everybody sitting behind the desk, and it's also what we discussed with them, they should be sitting above ground, because we think it's not the right thing to do. Sort of put people, even if they pay less rent, to put them in a basement, sort of 2 layers below ground.
Okay, thank you. That's Narcos, then that's Young.
Yeah, thank you. So my question was just about the frontage to Christopher Street, kind of opposite those terraces. The presentation and also the information we've got here talks about how you've sort of increased setbacks further up the building to allow kind of more access to daylight, but at the same time that kind of first setback is reduced by a metre, I think from 4.5 to 3.5. I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about what impact you think that will have on that kind of row terraces.
And if we can see that street, the side of the building street, it's worth pointing out that the Georgian terraces are offices, aren't they? They're not residential. Yeah. The residential is the other side, I think. So.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got the slide, so I can flick between these as necessary. I think perhaps if I just flick back to show the smaller diagrams that's visible. I mean, ultimately, we don't think that having an additional metre of setback is more beneficial than creating a series of steps in this facade. We think there's a better balance to be had by, as you can see, creating 4 tiers on the northern elevation, and you can see on the right hand side here how the visibility is reduced. And I think this is where we started to create these kinetic views, because it's, you can talk about numbers and you can stand in one location. I know these, sorry, they're not really going very smoothly, but I think, one metre we don't feel is noticeable. We don't think it changes the feeling you get on the street, but we do think that, say, reducing the tower element, as you see on the left at the end, will have a major benefit. We think having multiple tiers will have more of a benefit. So we just feel that on balance, it's a better proposition and will enhance the quality on that street in compared to the consented scheme.
Do you have a picture of how it looks now? Just comparison?
No, sorry, I don't have
There
the
is.
site photo.
Councillor?
Just a last question on the facade, the one taken down. Could you go back to the picture where you were showing it as it stands now, but with the, so with the facade, but with the new building behind?
Yeah.
I just want to get a sense of, I understand that if I was not on the ground, it would look much more consistent to have this lovely new building where it's a complete building. But if I'm walking along the street, it's going to look nicer to me to see the nice old buildings. I mean, I'm not noticing the new buildings. I can't, from street level, you know, I'm a lot shorter than that pillar. So I'm not going to be able to see the building above. I'm just going to see the nice Victorian thing. Is that, am I misunderstanding?
Sorry, which question?
So it's right that if I'm just walking along the street, I'm only going to see that Victorian building on the corner and the bit next to it. I'm not actually going to see the bit behind it. So it will make a big difference to what I see as a person walking along the street, somebody who frequently cycles past this but doesn't work there.
It is definitely correct that sort of architects tend to look a bit too much at the bird's eye view and probably a bit too, that's a sort of street level view. And again, I think that's something that we have taken into consideration, but we'll sort of continue to look at that as part of the process, because it is 100% valid point of view.
So just to check, you also mentioned that if you did it like this, it makes a difference to what you can sort of see through and underneath the pillars. So, but I would see the new building kind of through that, between the pillars, is that right? Can you just explain a little bit about why what you're seeing between the pillars, if you have to build it like this, is
yeah, so to try and explain, so yeah, between the brick piers, if we just look at this drawing here, the sort of space you see behind it is the new office space. There's a white band here. I mean, this is only a visualization. Of course, would be more detail done if this application was to continue. But that kind of white band you see there, and then the one on the floor below, particularly the one on the floor below, is actually the location of the floor slab behind it. So if I move across to the left-hand side, you can see my cursor just about, that's the window of the existing building, and that's the floor slab behind it. So 50% of that window would be blocked. I mean, there are details and architectural mechanisms for kind of trying to reduce the impact, but 50% of that window would be blocked by the floor slab, 50% of the light. And ultimately what you'll see through the window is a floor slab, floor in some
cases. Also, the important thing is see the ceiling of that floor below is now running halfway down that window. It's like this disconnect is disconnected.
Yeah, that makes
side
sense.
window and everything's not.
So that's on the basis of how it's designed. Sorry, I had Councillor Foster next. So.
I'd like to move on to a question about land.
Yeah, I think has there been any other questions on heritage assets? No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask questions in relation to the 100% use of office space. I mean, you're probably aware that there is a draft area action plan for Shoreditch, and where we prefer to have more mixed developments, a smaller percentage of residential. Given the opportunity to rethink the design, did you have any thoughts about residential at all? Did you consider it at all, or did you look at viability?
In truth, we didn't. We're aware of the policy. Obviously, we're aware of the extant scheme, and we had early discussions with officers about the way it's not quite 100% office. There's an element of retail in there, but the principle of an office-led scheme, and they agreed to that, noting the extant scheme before. So no, in short, we didn't test that. It's never been part of the approach. It's always been an office scheme.
Okay, next.
Can I ask?
Sorry, yeah, Councillor Webb. Sorry, do you have a follow-on?
It's going to be a follow-up.
Yeah,
I was going to say, presumably that's in keeping with the area. It's primarily office space in the immediate
Yeah,
vicinity.
that's right. There is a residential scheme directly adjacent to it, One Crown Place, but yes, it's primarily an office location. But we do recognise the policy in the action plan that it was the previous scheme was office and replacement is office.
I'm just wondering
Could
if
you use the microphone, please?
in terms of shape of place, I think it's recognised that residential would add to that shape of place of making the area much more vibrant throughout the week. So it just kind of works kind of acknowledging that we are creating another 100% office space within an area where there's lots of similar type spaces, and how much that is adding to the place. I'm not quite sure, but the fact that you have more of a comment.
Thanks. Thank you. And then Councillor Whitlam.
Thank you, Chair. In regards to cycle provision, we do not acknowledge that as in large scale falls short. We are going to be looking at that in terms of accessibility and encouraging people who come to this massive building to cycle. Just want to say that the double story methods aren't necessarily that accessible to people who do cycle, so I mean, you're working, and I know it's massive, and yet it's a constrained site, but please do look at the provision of cycling within the scheme, because we cannot tell you how important that is to us. And also when you get this feel of maximising the floor plate and then having this height. We used to opt that street furniture could be incorporated into the building, so particularly street lighting. So even in your kind of looping thing, we're banging into street lights. So is there any possibility of incorporating street lighting into your building? I'm just going to leave that and you and the team, because obviously we want to maximise the space in the pavements. Thank you.
Start with the bike question, because clearly we take that quite personal, given we're a Dutch college. Very sort of keen to sort of deliver the absolute sort of best possible bike facilities. We think with sort of the bike cafe, the right sort of entrance, I think from experience, you shouldn't have around. You need a very sort of gently sloped staircase, brushes and the things that go down. So that's all been thought through very carefully. It's a very nicely laid out space with lots of different sort of configurations of bike racks. To hit the numbers, we will have to sort of incorporate sort of some of the double stackers, but we believe that sort of people will be able to sort of use them. We've even thought about sort of the longer term, if hopefully sort of 20 years time, people are sort of all cycling to work. You could easily sort of expand out the bike facilities. Of course, you have to move some of the affordable workspace up inside the building, but at least there is the space, and you could easily sort of expand it. So it's really thought through from that perspective.
We absolutely encourage sort of the ease of using the cycle park, as well as not just the cycle park themselves. Quality is really important. Just on the short stay, can you just remind me how many short stay there are around the plan?
Yeah, so we're providing 26 short stay spaces, which it meets GLA requirements for the scheme. Obviously, it falls short of the current Hackney policy. I mean, it is a large number of spaces would be required to meet Hackney. I think the consented scheme wasn't able to achieve that. I don't think they could even achieve the 26 necessarily, because our site boundary is kind of hard up against the edge of the building. But the short stay spaces that we are providing, we're looking for it to be secure. So it could be in the green space on the left, it would be internal. So it is true short stay cycle parking. You can enter, your bike is secure before you then move in, rather than just Sheffield stands on the street everywhere. So it's limited, but we're still trying to do the best we can with the.
Yeah, and then the long stays all slightly short Hackney as well. Is that right? And what's that interest for the number of people that you expect to be using something on
So we have about, I think it's 1,150 bike spaces in total. I mean, that is, for context, 120%, 20% larger than what GLA want. It's 80% of the Hackney possible. I mean, it's a huge number of bikes, 1,100 people using that space. I mean, we do deliver big office schemes with huge bike stores and they get used, a fraction of the space. But we recognise the importance of cycle storage in this building and in Hackney. So we are providing a very significant offer there. I think what's also worth noting very, very quickly is that we see office schemes being used differently in the future. Whereas we were previously designing schemes to one person per 8 square meters, we've taken a clear decision with the client to do one person per 10 square meters here across all the services, the mechanical services, the lifts, the lighting, everything. So that's a 20% reduction in people in the building that we anticipate. There's a little parallel there to the slight reduction in cycle spaces as well, which doesn't account for building use.
Just for our knowledge, is that due to fewer people using it at all times, but wanting high quality sort of space? Is that...
Yeah, it's the hybrid working scenario now. Companies, a lot of people working at home multiple days. It just leads to fewer people in the office.
And not putting people so close together. When we don't have to. We can space with that.
Thank God. More questions?
Sorry, one more point on cycling. We have, Edge have instructed a cycling consultant whose name escapes me completely at this point. But I think the key thing for them is they thought the numbers were sufficient for them for people visiting. The other was the quality of the pitch, ensuring they've got better shower facilities, changing storage facilities. And then, as you mentioned, the ratio of double stack is to Sheffield or disability users or cargo bike. So that's the other thing that we're looking at as well.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, final point on that is probably to relate it back to the basement, because I think if we're having this retained basement, of course we could sort of increase the number of bikes. Here we're in the position that yes, we can retain the basement, but there is some pressure on the bikes. There's a little bit of pressure on the affordable workspace. We could easily sort of resolve that by building a bigger basement, but we think sort of in the round, balancing all these things, it is the right thing to sort of retain the current basement and provide what we still believe is the right number of bikes, but we recognise it's like short of the cost.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Desmond? And then...
Yeah, with the involvement of Mitsui, Foodson and yourselves at Edge, one of the pleasing aspects is that it appears as though you're intending to develop this yourself rather than as one or two places do sell with the benefit of planning permission. So I wanted to just confirm that that is your intention, which is good. The second thing, just a normal thing, what sort of timescale are we talking about in terms of start to completion? And the third thing, with large-scale residential developments, particularly people like Lane and Woodrow and others, we've had apprentice schemes which have been part of the development plan, treated officers in advance. I'm not sure whether we've done it with commercial schemes, but is there any possibility you could have some sort of apprentice scheme so that local apprentices can actually be involved in the construction?
I'll deal with that one first. Yes, in short answer, Section 106 I think requires that, and it's something that Edge have actually got one project in London already. They've just started on site pretty recently, actually, in the last month. There's an apprenticeship scheme there. There's an apprenticeship scheme here, and that is it.
I think that also answers the question that yes, we're very committed. As Mitsui, I think in terms of delivering this scheme, we don't sort of give signs. That's not sort of what we do. We just committed to our first scheme over at London Bridge in what is a very difficult time to be delivering schemes, but we believe that this highly sustainable, highly sort of healthy office product is what people will require in the future. That's why we managed to sort of proceed with that scheme. We have the same intention with this one. Clearly, the timelines are not completely set yet. We'll be going first of all planning when we achieve planning. So the earliest we could start on site would be somewhere 2024. when the site comes back to us, but of course subject to sort of planning and a number of other things. And it will take about 3 years to construct the building as well.
Thanks. Great, thank you. Councillor Young, and then Councillor Seneca, please.
I hope this is going to bore everybody else, but I'd really like to know a little bit more about the detail of the energy efficiency plan that you have. So particularly how you're going to heat the building and how effective the heating system you're planning will be for a building of this size.
Shall I comment a little bit on this? This is something that we spent a lot of time on, both here and sort of previously. First of all, as a business, we've set a target as the REBA 2050 target to be sort of Paris-proof, which is 55 kilowatt hours per square meter in total here in the UK. And then it's a bit tighter, 50 kilowatt hours per square meter in total, so 50, that's basically our target. We've then looked at sort of course, we have our regular energy consumption and we have the plug-in loads. We've said we can use up to 25 kilowatt hours per square meter, and then the tenant can use the other sort of 25 kilowatt hours per square meter. Something that we do a lot of in the Netherlands, because we're doing sort of ABN AMRO's in headquarters, and they only care about sort of the total energy consumption. So they said, let's work together, deliver that sort of 50, so that we stick to the 2050 target here. So on Edgecombe Bridge, we managed to push this 25 kilowatt hours per square meter down to what, 22. Here we're pushing in the same direction. We're doing that by a number of things. So there's not one silver bullet. So first of all, it's carefully designing the facades, making sure that we don't get too much solar gain. So even though they look quite transparent, there's like 55, so it's carefully sort of looked around how much openness we have in the facade. Very insulated facade, of course, we don't get too much heat now. Then we tend to use a very passive system for heating and cooling. So in the Netherlands, we use a lot of climate islands. It's radiation-based heating and cooling, which is more comfortable, but also sort of a lot more efficient. We're using an off-floor plant rather than central plant, which means that sort of we can easily sort of dial up and down the building. Also, if there be a pandemic or something else, people only occupying certain floors with more flexibility. The whole system of air source heat pumps, sort of really sort of heating in a very efficient way. So with all these measures, basis of heating and cooling really diminishes. The biggest one that's left over and it's hardest to put down is lighting. We did a lot of work with Philips in the Netherlands, how we can drive efficiency in the lighting, how we can use sort of smart technology to sort of make it more adjustable, sort of daylight, etc. So really sort of squeeze the basket of energy out. So sorry if I bored you with a lot of detail, but that's
brilliant.
The type of way that we sort of approach a building like this to sort of really make it as efficient as possible.
So just to follow up, with all of the other provisions in place, the air source heat pumps and the sort of size of air source heat pumps and the range that you're going to use, have you seen these working effectively in a size of building like this elsewhere? I know these things do seem to work better in the Netherlands than here.
Yes, we have, and we're actually we're using them on the Roller project as well. I think ideally we would probably look at using ground source heat pumps, but it's slightly questionable sort of how much capacity we can get from the ground here. So air source heat pumps are a bit more predictable and probably a bit more reliable, but it is a well-proven technology, and we don't have much concern about just got to run the building in a bit smarter way, make sure that you don't get sort of these Venkel, you just blast on the bulb and have hot air and often sort of at the same time, just carefully sort of balancing the heat and about full base and making sure that running your building a bit smarter and wasting energy.
If I could just add two more minor design points as well, in addition to all of that. So two elements. One is about air distribution, and Bernard already alluded to it, but it's a whole system of underfloor air distribution. So air is pumped through the floors and it rises up into the office space. Now that's become a very important kind of post-COVID response, if you like, to how you distribute air throughout the building, rather than traditionally fan core systems pumping air out at high level. It's 2 meters above your head before it gets down to your desk, having air rising up just below your desk, fresh air provision at very, very high fresh air rates, higher than the majority of office schemes we work on here. Very, very important aspect of this design. The second is openable windows, and not to be overlooked. We think it's very, very important for cooling of the building, user comfort. People really like being able to open their windows, and there's just not enough office buildings that have openable windows, and that's been a key part of our design, and that's what you see coming through in the articulation of the windows and where they're located. And that helps with the kind of the cooling and the airflow rates. And again, not to bore anyone, but that ties into the technology aspect of it as well, the idea of sensors within the building, red lights and green lights that will tell you when the air quality is good enough outside, when it's a bit too warm inside, when it's the right time to open the windows, and we're looking at how that can be integrated.
Councillor Potter, just before we go, is there any other questions that anyone has generally? Yeah, Councillor Saleh.
I was just going to add, I thought 50 kilowatt hours per square metre, if I said the correct measurement, sounds a little bit high for a modern office building. I would have thought you'd better get it lower than that.
But it's probably because a lot of people sort of report on this Part L energy consumption. So the 50 is the total. So the Part L
We can hear you again now. Thank you.
Yeah. It was just like work looks fantastic and sounds like the other things very basic space. Apart from that, very obvious has been on for it. I just wanted to put up any rationale other than financial volume that I have goals for these houses and great teams. Whether there's going to be all the workplace first one.
Can I just add, as it's understand, just in terms of design concepts, so
Yes, there is a rationale for having a let's start creating this teams and one totally one space before people that obviously a lot of things. We want the Ryan people gathering around this street. So it's hard with me to get around from the top. The cases are building. Hopefully, really successful because for prayers in the building, wants to involve something associates, opportunities, and touch for services will be in the building and use of benefit for us to get the that's why I have the helpful speak of trust also for that space what the space was discount space higher then I'm sure 67 that we are with the workspace speed. The big challenge for us is to get better space because we are quite a space take time in the corner of us. If you want more, work for a Ross next time, nation, and we have this 5 tenants. A startup on the basement, but the basement in the center scheme, the easy so you 10% green limit, even the gas, gas, is last compared to the percentage that all space now, but all ground very well is integrated two days behind times in that figure.
So that's not very similar. Very similar condition, given capacity, where we have some criteria about building accessibility building which have side to side access room option. Their assistant, affordable workspace is coming set up. Their access to on the ground and level up and level and holds and the whole area around the front of the building. Anyone who's building all goes to work there, it immediately becomes a secretary, which is coming. And they have a lot of organised events and they have some time with all types of space where general presentations going on, meetings going on. Space can also be used on other communities much more easily. By contrast, the tenants will be much more secure. What? Early builds on the street level, on the entrance level. It'd be very life
space. So, this is quite the basis of the
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, right, yeah. Sort of succeed on because
Yeah, it's on the green space. It is a really nice but I wasn't the only doing something else. It kind of thanks friendly features spaces.
yeah, I think we're still working with balance. The still fringe and really very, very important, very essential. Especially enclosure, space, essentially, the ability from each other, people's context. And we are looking at ways that we can look at enhance in those states in that way, so to extend further into state office, seating, sitting marks. We think there's a great opportunity and there's also a big ownership. So I think it typically also we want to create a harder space more often against our edges because that's what the doors play open because essentially seating tables and chairs and something those elements. But yeah, we try and get our balance right because we do miss each other.
Let's go back to the council to housing excuse and agile working. I think one of the design of this space, which is very clean office use, needs any experts in the future. We find just need external process in this area.
It's quite clearly. I think it's something really
there is generally He's live streaming their house to we like the thing side of the thing that's just all the time. Yes, change. Okay, great. Proud of that. Presentation. Encourage imagination makes otherwise anything on the questions as well, and I think that's it for now right now. So I think
I'll just do it then. Apologies. The internet.
just to say, obviously, the next formal plan is on 2nd November. And obviously, the next pre-app meeting, because we've got another one, is there scheduled for the 14th of November.
I simply want some of the, well, I don't think can we end the meeting and then?
Yeah, well, yeah, so, yeah, form, officer.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Otherwise, and that's.
Yeah. Yeah.